My name is Tim Bull. I am your host here today on the In-Event Theatre. I work for In-Event. We are an all-in-one event management platform. We would love you to come to our little booth next door and come and have a chat with us. We've got some giveaways and things if you'd like to learn more about our all-in-one platform. However, today I would like to introduce our next session, which I am very excited about. I'm going to be listening in intently because this is very much me. So the name of our session today is No Place for the Over 50s, and a little bit of a bio on this is around 30% of the UK workforce is over 55, but only 10% of the events industry is over this age. Our industry invests in schemes to attract the next generation, but what are we doing to retain experience and knowledge and encourage people to stay past their 50th birthday? Very relevant. Is ageism the biggest diversity issue we have to tackle? In a predominantly female industry, how does the menopause play a part? So how can we, as an industry, keep this experience within our sector, and why should we? So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to Jill Hawkins, who's Director of Aniseed PR and 50Plus events. And also on the panel today is Margaret Reeves, Managing Director of RefTech, Holly Patrick, Senior Journalist at Northstar Meetings Group, Caroline Walters, Director and Co-Founder at Mission Menopause, and Robert Kenward at Fitability Recruiter and U-Search and Select. Just before I leave you, I would ask you to scan the QR code and post any questions that you may have, and I will see you again just before the end of the session. We'll go through some of those questions. Brilliant. Over to you. Good luck.
Thank you, Tim, and thank you to everyone for joining. I'm just looking around, and if you'd like to come a little bit closer, please do. So, thanks for the introduction. I'm going to go straight into our first question then, to our panel. In your opinion, is ageism a key diversity issue in the events industry? And does ageism affect different organisations differently? I'm going to start with Robert.
Hi. Okay, everyone? Yeah. Hi, thanks for coming along. Is ageism, I mean, the answer is yes. You know, let's just end the session there. I think ageism, unfortunately, is something that we've all experienced. I, as a recruiter, have heard it both from employers and job seekers, and it's still something that, for some reason, is seen as something we're happy to talk and joke about and laugh about. It's something that affects all of the industry. My experience specifically is event agencies and experiential agencies, so the very creative side of the sector, and I come up against this time and time again. It's something that we all know is an issue, but no one really wants to sort of approach it with anything like a solution, which is what we're really looking for.
Thanks, Robert. Margaret, do you feel the same?
Yes, I do. We run events, and we do a lot of on-site events, and we've experienced where the organiser has requested that we send through some photo shots of the on-site personnel so that they can choose who they want as the on-site manager. And I've gone, no, we're not a staffing agency in the first instance, and no, you know, that's not acceptable. You'll basically get who you get. All of our staff are experienced because it's more about the experience than the age or how they look, as per se. So yes, I think it is a growing problem, and COVID obviously hasn't helped the journey because a lot of people have walked away from the industry because of the uncertainties of surrounding that.
Interesting. Holly, I know that you recently did some research into the menopause, and did you find that there were issues with people, you know, do you think that ageism is an issue?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think ageism is a societal issue, of course, and we see it in all industries, not just our industry as a creative industry. I think it's very nuanced, so I think we have to look at it from, as Robert, as you were saying, the kind of subtleties, the joking about it as well. But yeah, Jill, the research that you're referring to was specifically around menopause in the events industry. And the research that we did was the respondents, 95% were women and 51% were aged 45 to 54. And the research showed us that at that age, there was a huge amount, 63% said that the menopause which happens at a certain age on average, had stopped them from doing their job. 70% said it had a negative impact on their mental health. And there's so much research out there about women of a certain age, and I say a certain age, I mean that on average that menopausal age, leaving their jobs because they just feel unsupported. So I think when we talk about ageism as well, and Jill, I think we're going to get onto this, we have to talk about the intersectionality of it as well and how it affects men and women differently.
Absolutely, thank you. And I know, yes, absolutely. We've got questions later about menopause because we are very much a female industry. So my next question to the panel would be about the benefits from an industry-wide perspective. What are the benefits of maintaining a diverse age demographic, and how can this actually contribute to the overall success and sustainability of the event sector? My first question to Holly. Picked that out, didn't I?
Yeah, thanks for that, Jill. So yeah, the benefits. I mean, there's a lot of research that just going back to this sort of the societal issue of the way that we perceive ageism, is often to do with like capabilities, creativity as well, being lacking creativity, slowing down, and okay, there might be research pointing towards motor skills, but often we find in the older generations, especially within the workforce, they're far more creative because they have decades of experience to pull on, and also generation to generation, the older generations that are in the workforce now have much better concentration abilities. You know, they actually have they're able to focus, unlike maybe a younger generation who grew up with mobile phones and social media and can't bear to be bored for even a second. So just going back to your question about the benefits of maintaining diversity in terms of age in a workforce, I think it really speaks for itself. And how can a younger generation, in my opinion, learn anything if we don't have anybody to learn from?
Absolutely, and I'd like to take this question to Caroline, because you come from a background working across all industries and coming from the hospitality industry. How do you see the benefits?
I think probably, I mean, just adding to kind of what Holly has said there, I think when we're looking at this, not least, I mean, from the hospitality sector or the event sector, the reality of it is that it brings stability. It brings, that really broad skill set. But I think really not least, it kind of ultimately contributes to the diverse audience that you represent in terms of your customer profile. And I think, to me, that was probably one of the key things, is that you want to be broadly representing the customer profile that you're representing. So, along with that varied experience and the stability and bringing that wealth of experience to the workforce. Those are some of the things that I would really clearly be looking at.
Brilliant. I mean, Robert, as a recruiter in the industry, what benefits can you see about keeping these people in the industry?
I think the main benefit, and I think it's something that it will come to a wall and then something will change, is the financial benefit to these clients. So, for example, I said I work with experiential agencies and events agencies, and a lot of their end user clients are brands. And brands are obviously selling products to consumers and they want them to buy them. And they're looking at the demographics of who they're selling to. So, for example, I've got a pair of Adidas Gazelles, for those that remember Adidas Gazelles, and these aren't bloody cheap trainers. I'm paying for them in instalments, by the way. So they're targeting that premium brand, and they're looking at who's actually buying this. Is the end buyer an older person? Is it someone who's more mature? Are they buying them for the younger generation? Who's buying it? And they're looking at saying, well, actually, why are we targeting here when these are the people giving us our money? So just from a purely cut and dry financial point of view, brands are missing out, because there was something recently about a recent advert that it being like an urban, diverse advert, and when they looked at the advertising agency and the company behind it, it was full of white men. And they were like, well, how are you saying you can talk to the people that are buying your product when you're not from that area? And it's the same with age.
Absolutely. Margaret, as a key employer in the industry, what benefits do you see from employing older people over 50?
Knowledge and experience. I'm fortunate in that 30% of my staff are over 50. As a business, we've got over 220 years of combined service, and that's something I'm extremely proud of. Without that knowledge and experience, I don't feel that we would be as successful as we are. Anybody working in the events industry, particularly with what we do, you have to learn the software, the functionality. It takes time to share the knowledge and experience, and having the longevity has reaped rewards for us, and long may that continue.
Brilliant, thank you everybody. My next question is all about gender dynamics. So Holly, you touched earlier about the menopause, and I know that's Caroline's area of specialisation as well, but we are a predominantly female industry. 70% of the industry are female. So how might the challenges associated with the menopause contribute to the underrepresentation of individuals over 50? And is there anything happening to actually help and support people during that time of their life? I'm going to go to Caroline.
Okay, yeah, I think, just talking about the event sector today, where, as we've said, 77% of the workforce are women, menopause is absolutely a topic where we really need to be removing that stigma and taboo, really normalising that conversation and talking about it, because fundamentally this does have an impact if somebody is experiencing menopausal symptoms on their day-to-day activity. If we just start with the reality of it is that, let's start with the stats. 50% of the population will experience menopause, and the other 50% indirectly are likely to experience the effects of menopause, whether that's because they're a partner, they're a work colleague, they're a line manager. And when you kind of look at those stats and understanding that this is a hormonal transition, it's not something that we kind of ask for. It's not something that can be ignored. The reality of it is that as a woman and anybody, we've got to think here also of our transgender and non-binary community. Anybody with ovaries is actually going to experience menopause. So to normalise that conversation in the workplace and to provide the relevant support in terms of providing everybody with the knowledge around what this experience is all about, then that can kind of only benefit what we're talking about today in terms of, supporting. We talked about just a minute ago, women of a certain age. I try to avoid that.
Sorry.
Well, no, I avoid it because this isn't just about women of a certain age. As I said, it affects people indirectly and directly. But in reality, I think the average age, I'll just give you some statistics, the average age of a woman experiencing menopause in the UK is 51. But the symptoms that have the impact at work, in reality, if you're in your early 40s, you really need to be understanding what this is all about. So, we're talking about over 50s here. If we start talking about menopause, this can start really having an impact, and probably does, in our early 40s, because it's actually the perimenopause where we start to experience those symptoms that can have the impact. And when I'm talking about symptoms, I'm talking about not only the physical symptoms, and we all talk about the hot flush, but we're also talking here about the psychological symptoms as well. And we know, if we look at the top 6 symptoms that have the greatest impact on us from a work point of view, more than half of those are the psychological and cognitive symptoms. Now, for somebody experiencing those symptoms, I think the most crucial thing, and I'm absolutely passionate about it, of course, is that they understand what those symptoms are. This, to me, is about education, so that somebody understands what those symptoms are, understands potentially what the impact is from a work perspective, and with that knowledge and understanding, and hopefully a supportive workplace, they can get the appropriate help and support inside and outside of work to ensure, the benefit for all workplaces, that they are fulfilling that, they're fulfilling the career that they have they've worked so hard to achieve. And if you kind of look at just very quickly those symptoms, when we're looking at symptoms, we know that kind of 1 in 4 women will have debilitating symptoms. but 50% will experience symptoms one way or another. And that transition can be as simple as 4 years, if I call it simple, or you can be taking, the transition can take about 15 years. So, that's a long time to be accommodating those symptoms in the workplace. And I think just really, before I finish, just to leave you with the final stats. And I think this for me, this is the bit where I think if we understand that actually in reality, we know 1 in 10 women leave the workforce as a result of their menopausal symptoms, regardless of whether they know that or not. This is all about education. I think more importantly, in the workplace, we know that we've got 25% of women sitting there, thinking that they might leave the workforce because of their menopausal symptoms, and 8% of women pass up promotion, take on additional responsibility as a result of those symptoms. Now, with some really simple changes and the right support, the reality of it is that could all be negated. So I think that this is a really important conversation.
That's brilliant, thank you. And I'm actually going to go back to you with a slight off-piste question here. You mentioned when we were chatting the other day how the menopause impacts on stress and how we cope with stress. And seeing as the events industry was classed as one of the top 5 stressful jobs in an American survey, and over the last 5 or 6 years we've had a lot of anti-stress campaigns, and Stress Matters and Helen and all those sort of campaigns, Eventwell, to actually help people cope with stress better in the events industry. You mentioned the other day that menopause affects that.
Do you know, this was a complete light bulb for me, and I'm happy to share my menopause journey was one of hindsight. I've joined up the dots. I only wish I knew then what I now know. And one of those light bulb moments for me, given the role that I was in at the time as well, was that we are more affected due to our hormonal changes during menopause. We're more affected by stress during that period of time. Now, had I understood that, I was working in a really stressful job. I think I probably would have looked at things differently. Instead, I was just sitting there thinking, I actually can't cope. I'm not too sure really what's going on here. I've done this job for quite a few years. I should know what I'm doing. There were things that are happening. And I think if I had understood that I was more susceptible to stress and the impact of that in terms of what that meant it becomes a vicious circle, because you are more, you can become more stressed. That has an impact on your symptoms. So, anxiety can get worse, etc., etc. And I just think if I had known that, I would have felt a little bit more, okay, that's happening to me right at this moment in time. Therefore, what can I do what are those coping strategies? And I hear a lot of people say, you mentioned it in the event sector, it's a stressful job. You can't necessarily take that away from what's going on. We always need to be looking at as if we can make things as less stressful as possible. But given that we're in that type of environment, isn't it about having that understanding and therefore looking at what those coping mechanisms are, and in the workplace providing some support so that we can support people through that period of time?
That's great, thank you.
I'm quite happy. There's quite a few things that can be done, not just about stress, but about implementing menopause in the workplace. We can talk about that later.
That's brilliant. And we all share details for anyone that wants further information. I think that's great. Holly, regarding menopause, tell us more about the research you did, and obviously how the menopause has impacted on the people taking part in your survey.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think it was really telling. I think it was the first sort of research of its kind within the events industry.
It was
specifically, and we got a really good data set. Like I say, predominantly women of, I'm not going to say a certain age. Sorry, I don't mean it like that. That are inflicted or at that point of their life where they are experiencing or have experienced menopause. But I just wanted to say that women in general, and I don't know if there is research, the comparative research, but women in general on average have a lot more hurdles in their working life to get through and get over by the time they get to 50 plus. leaving the industry maybe to have a family, being primary caregivers to children or to ailing parents or people that are older than them. And then you put menopause on top of that, and on top of female health in general as well, which is often something that people inflicted with monthly. By the time they get to 50, I imagine they're just absolutely exhausted. So if they're working for an organisation that doesn't really care about their well-being, they're probably going to be thinking, yeah, I am going to leave this industry, that this just isn't for me, I don't feel represented, I don't feel seen anymore. But specifically from the research that we conducted at Northstar Meetings Group, only 13% of respondents said that they thought they'd missed out on a promotion. And I say only 13% because that seems like quite a small figure. But if you're sat in an organisation thinking, actually, yeah, I've missed out on that promotion because of my female health, because of my symptoms, because I'm going through the menopause and they don't think that I can cope, or they don't know I'm going through the menopause because we don't have that open culture where we can talk about how I'm feeling. That's actually a really high proportion, and that's something that on average the other sex or people that don't experience menopause, they don't have to worry about that. So I thought that was a really telling sign. But on Caroline's point, in terms of what we can do to cultivate caring and caring work cultures. What are we calling it? Inclusive, there we go. And caring. Yeah, one and the same. And I think this doesn't just go for menopause, this goes for anybody at any stage of their career. Really, it's about education and awareness, and fostering that openness, encouraging dialogue, and that comes from education as well, and not being afraid to talk about those different stages of your career. Whether you're a fresh graduate, you're 21, what's affecting you, what's keeping you up at night, all the way through your career, all the way to 50 and plus. So not just around the menopause, but that well-being piece in general. Flexible work arrangements, that kind of came throughout the pandemic really anyway, didn't it? It landed on our plates. So it's interesting to see now as well, Robert, when you're talking to companies as a recruiter, as a headhunter, what they're looking for, and also what the clients are looking for in terms of that. Is remote working, hybrid working more important in terms of well-being? It's circular, right? It all comes back to the person, the individual, working in an organisation, and whether they feel comfortable enough to ask to work from home for whatever reason that might be. Developing policies and leave policies as well. And I think no matter if you're a male or a female at any stage of your career, these are all things that organisations should be taking into consideration if they want to retain good talent and not have to keep rehiring, if someone's leaving on maternity leave or leaving it because they're 50 plus and they feel like they're not seen anymore.
Absolutely. Following on the, that you touched there on creating an inclusive work environment. I want to bring this to Margaret as a employer in the industry. How can companies create inclusive work environments? Have you got any experience of how you've created an inclusive working environment for you and your team? Because you mentioned earlier that 30% of your workforce of your team are over 50. That's really big. That's good. Well done. So yes, what experience have you got of that?
Flexibility is important. We do have a variety of people types in the business. This year I chose to invest in a wellbeing programme because it's been so pressured and so busy for us post-pandemic that I was concerned about staff becoming burnt out, like us all, struggling to get new staff into the business, and wanting to make sure that we were looking after our people. So we've invested in the wellbeing programme. We've also invested in a quiet room in the business as well. Flexible working is important, so people being allowed to work from home. That's very much subject to the demands of the events going on at any given time. But just being there, I've always had an open door policy. That they tell me I'm not the usual MD. I very much wear my heart on my sleeve, sometimes to my own detriment. But I'm a firm believer. I may be the head of the company, but without the staff around me, we don't have a business. And without the staff, we don't succeed. So it's important to look after each and every one. and the demands are going to be different person to person.
Absolutely. Caroline, I'd like to pass the question over to you.
Yeah, I think sitting kind of with my HR hat on as well, and I am going to bring this just back to, it doesn't matter whether you're talking really here about menopause or being age inclusive, but I think the most important thing is that cultural shift. If that's something that you don't have in your organisation at the moment, you know, one of the questions that I get asked in the role that I'm doing now is how do you even start that change and break that cultural shift or normalise the conversation. And what I would say fundamentally that I see that works really well is, whether it's about age or whatever it might be, whether it's about menopause, it is about senior leaders taking ownership. It's about senior leaders talking about their experience and normalising that conversation. And I know, you know, I'm working in the menopause kind of world at the moment with corporates, and actually having a senior leader that comes out and says, you know, I am experiencing menopause, this is the impact it has. Once that happens within an organisation, everybody that might be feeling the same way breathes that little bit of sigh of relief and think, oh my God, finally, you know, or somebody is actually talking about it, and I feel that I might be able to talk about it. So I think that cultural shift bit is probably the most important thing to start normalising the conversation. And then to talk about what perhaps Holly was talking about earlier, you are then talking about education and awareness. That to me, there is always policy and guidance, of course, but the reality of it is that once you start to normalise that conversation, you then need to, you know, support it from either a wellbeing point of view or an EDI perspective, depending on what your strategy is, but bringing in and actually normalising the conversation through education and awareness.
That's great. I mean, I'd like to pick up on something that was mentioned earlier about flexible work arrangements, in that Robert, do you think in your role where you work closely with agencies on their recruitment strategies, do you think that introducing things like part-time roles, job sharing, remote work options are actually good options for actually retaining the over 50s in that sort of environment?
Yeah, I mean, the simple answer is obviously yes, and I think that obviously counts for any work environment at any level at all. And I think a lot of the progressive agencies that I'm speaking with and placing people in now are actually looking more, and we've talked about this before, more about a project working environment than a flexible working environment. Because as an industry, events and experiential, my area, we've sort of got stuck in this 3 days in the office, 2 days at home, and think that's flexible or this is the new thing. But actually that's not. That's actually hybrid working, that's set hours. And even those set hours are difficult for people of any age, but especially, you know, generally you have kids as you get older, to work around the work-life balance. And I think companies that listen and actively listen are the companies that will win. Because companies that tell, where are you getting that information from? And it will bite you on the arse too far down the line for you to do anything from. So absolutely. Absolutely. I think that the flexible working pattern for me, which the employee decides where and when they need to be based on what the client, the employer has said they need for that week, that's the model I think we're all really looking to work towards.
Brilliant. Caroline, talking about flexible working, do you see that as a big option for employees across the board?
Yeah, I think I would advocate what's just been said there. I think it applies to all generations, all employees. I think, you know, the point here is it's about listening to your workforce. That's the reality. And I think when you, whether we're looking at our guidance, our policies, or whatever we're deciding to do with our compensation, our benefits, the reality of it is that we need to be flexible enough to be able to listen to what's being said. I think that's an absolute key point.
Oh, back to Robert.
I forgot to mention, just on that subject, we just completed the annual events industry salary survey sponsored by C-Event, blah, blah, blah. And we had over 1,300 people respond. And one of the questions we asked was, what are the things you would like changed in your current working environment, benefits package? And the number one, I think it was 55%?
Oh, yeah, it was, just over half.
55% said they'd like a 4-day working week. Now, before a lot of us go, yeah, of course you don't want to work very hard, 4-day working week is actually being paid for 5 and working 4. not doing 5 days in 4, that's compressed hours, not slaving people to the point of this is not there. And I think we talk a lot about people saying I'm more productive at home. I'm 25% apparently more productive at home. If that's the case, why do you need them to work 5 days a week if they're more productive working from home? So that's, I think, something we will move towards again as well, like clever progressive companies.
I think that's really interesting, the fact it's not just the over 50s or over 55s that want that level of flexibility. They want more of a work-life balance, and they're prepared to ask for it. So that's great. I mean, my last question, before we go to see if anyone would like to ask a question from the audience, is about changing perspectives. How can we challenge and change the attitudes towards ageing in the workplace? How can we as society change our attitudes towards older people? And especially a question for Caroline, are there any other examples from outside of the industry that we can actually adopt in our industry? Because I don't think there's anything in the events industry at the moment that is challenging perceptions and encouraging older people to stay. So my question to Caroline is, are there any examples of initiatives happening outside of the industry that we can steal?
Yeah, I think if you actually take a look, for example, at the CIPD, by way of example, so the Chartered Institute of Personnel and Development, if you're not from the HR world, but they, for example, are they've got something called a Step Ahead mentoring program, just by way of example. So this is and this is one of the things that I would suggest when we're looking, at our kind of over 50s in terms of retaining them in the workforce. But this is positioning people within the sector or within any sector up with those that are seeking a role. So providing that mentorship to really support people to come back into the workplace. Lots of companies in your top 100 companies, so to speak. They have their policies in place. They provide some really good case studies. I know, by way of example, Santander, for example, and Aviva have been recognised for the work they're doing in terms of kind of that menopause piece. So there are examples out there that you can kind of take a look at as to what best practice might look like.
Brilliant, thank you. Holly, what do you think we can do?
So just to answer your question and also add to Caroline's point, so we caught up in the week and you asked us to have a little think about this question, so I was straight on Google, obviously, what are other people doing outside of the industry, and I was like, oh, this is cool, like people are really taking this seriously. So the blueprint is already there and all we have to do is copy and paste and adapt it for our industry. So a few examples here. Unilever's got a second career internship program where they, to attract and retain older workers, it's for people over 50 and it gives them the opportunity to return to the workforce and calls upon their experience. So it's not saying like, start maybe where a graduate or a typical intern would start. We want to learn from you. So that's what Unilever's doing. EY, they've got a learning platform which has got a wide range of learning opportunities on it, so which is really cool because often I think we were talking about this, Caroline, where we traditionally think of a career going like this and you get to the top, and now I think generations already in the workforce and coming into the workforce want to be multi-skilled. They want to, I work in the editorial team, but I've got real interest in marketing, for example, and social media and across the board, and I love learning of what the commercial team does. So you don't have to be completely siloed in what you're doing, and I think that should apply to every stage of your career if you've got an interest in it. IBM's got a reboot program. So that's designed to help professionals who have taken a career break for whatever reason return into the workforce. Obviously, these companies do have big budgets, probably massive HR, human resource departments as well. But you don't have to do it on that scale. We can look at what you can do whether you're a company of 2 or 2,000. So yeah, I think there's a lot we can do. We just need to be really proactive in having these conversations. I think someone who is probably in the still like the early stages of a career, I like to think. I think I've still got an absolute heaps to learn. I think it's about asking those questions and just not being fearful about initially asking those questions and then what someone might say. I think we're so wrapped up in maybe seeming disrespectful, both ends of the spectrum, or so we just have these perceptions and we just let them rule us, and that's kind of ridiculous, right? Because all it does is reinforce those stereotypes, which is dangerous, is completely dangerous. So yeah, from my point of view, I have some colleagues here and they'll testify that I'm always asking questions, sometimes silly, sometimes important, but yeah, just ask them anyway and see what response you get, because you're always going to learn.
That's brilliant. And the last question to Margaret, and then I'll come to you, Robert. So what can we do?
I was thinking about Faye Sharp's Fast Forward programme.
That would be amazing, wouldn't it?
And whether that could be steered for the older person. I think they have a mixed age group within that programme, but Faye's obviously very much an advocate in the industry, so it's whether there's an opportunity there.
Absolutely. Do you think we might need a 50 over 50?
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm putting it out there. Somebody please take me up on that. And then the same question to Robert. What can we do?
I think it's actually quite simple. I think we need to embrace it. I think age is the only bias that happens to everyone on the planet, and I think sometimes that fear internally is what stops us. And I hear a lot of things, a lot of the pushback comes down to, I don't know how to manage somebody that's got more experience than me, therefore I'm fearful. You can't suddenly change from black to white. You can't suddenly change from man to, well, sorry, that's a whole different section, but we're all going to get old. That is going to happen. It's 67 is the retirement age in the UK, and we're living in a world where people are living longer than they ever have before due to medicine and things like that. You have to embrace this. That if we want to keep evolving as a business, we can't keep relying on the new talent generation and the people we've got in it. We have to look outside, and people that have got the experience already who can come and hit the ground running.
Absolutely, thank you. So just before we open up to questions, we've got 5 minutes left. Is that okay? Ish, a couple of minutes. I just wanted to say that based on this, and there's a sort of a hidden meaning behind this, in that we're launching a website, a PR campaign and a social media campaign next week. Next week it is National Older Workers Week. Yes, there's a week for everything. And so next week we're actually launching an initiative called 50+ events, and it's to inspire, gain recognition, promote opportunities for the over 50s in the workplace, in the events industry. So if you have any stories, would like to get involved, please come and see me afterwards. We'd love to have you on board. So any questions? Oh, we can't hear you. Sorry.
We do have some questions, so I will bring them up on the screen if you'd like to just run through them. Is that okay?
I wasn't expecting questions. So, first question, are the over 50s and senior roles within the industry at director or C-suite level directly responsible for the lack of over 50s because they pursue younger members of staff for their willingness to work long hours, travel often and lower the cost of business less to employ? Oh, that's an interesting one. I'm going to go straight to Robert with this one.
It is. It's a really interesting, and it goes back to age being a bias that people are happy to talk about. We talk about saying, we're looking for an up-and-coming, somebody that's, still got a lot to learn and still hungry, and then we associate that with being a certain demographic. And I think it goes back to what I said before. There's a fear factor. If you're bringing in somebody that used to be a managing director of an agency that's bigger than yours, and they're coming to yours as a client services director reporting to you, they know more than you. And I think that barrier there is why people in senior leadership positions do sometimes act as that. And I think it's this constant craving for the new and the shiny, and rather than, we all talk about having experience. We ask for 5 years of experience in events just to get into the industry, which is ridiculous. So why are we then at the other end of the spectrum saying, oh, too much experience?
Do you think that the events industry is a little bit focused on cost, that we want to bring prices down, that the agencies out there are employing younger people because they're cheaper?
I think it's an incorrect assumption. And I use the example, my wife now works for the civil service, and she's on probably less than, well, she's on 100% less than she was when she worked in corporate world. But the flexibility given to her, and to be honest, her pension's phenomenal, so I'm stuck with her, or she's stuck with me, whichever way you think of it. But one of the things is her company have really embraced that. They're like, we've got she's not here, so she won't mind, she's a 44-year-old woman with a lot of experience. They're loving it. they're paying her X amount of money, knowing they would have to pay her double in another environment. They have all her experience. She's been promoted 3 times in 2 years. So they're really embracing that. Great, she's got experience and she wants to work here because we're providing a lifestyle package rather than just cost of living package. So I think that's the thing, we really miss out on that.
Thank you. I think that's a really good point, actually, that assumption that older people are more expensive. So next question from Paul. I love the fact it's not anonymous. I think we've got 1 minute. The majority of businesses in the event sector are in the SMB, small business category, often stretched and without the resources of the large corporates. How does the panel suggest that we, in the SMB group, adopt some of these cultural shifts? Is it a case of money, or can smaller companies actually implement some of these things that we're talking about? Caroline?
I think if I just take this from implementing menopause, I'm completely on board. I understand what you're saying. I think we've talked about a lot of large companies today. For me, there are some real simple wins in terms of adding that support. And the reality of it is that some of those, if you're looking at it from a menopausal point of view, it's about the cultural shift. Start making that cultural shift. That's probably the biggest one. Provide some of that education and awareness, or resources. It's just resources and support sometimes. Ensure that you're communicating in the right way, so the type of language and the neutral language. And from supporting women, particularly from a menopausal point of view, it's not hugely costly. There's some really simple practical adjustments that can be made. So just very finally on that note, if you are a small, medium-sized business and you're looking at this from supporting menopause in the workplace specifically, the BSI have just literally launched, it's free to download, a menstrual health and menopause standard that's really good from a practical point of view, and is aimed at small, medium-sized businesses.
Brilliant, thank you. I think we've run out of time. Tim, can we have one more question? Okay. Let's wait for the next question then. Okay. Which one are we going to go for? Oh, there is no doubt that the menopause has physical and psychological impacts. How do we encourage employers to support, and what techniques do you recommend those going through the menopause to use excel in their role? Interesting. I'm going to go to Caroline again.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've said quite a few already. I would say just based on that question, it comes back to the cultural shift, but I would absolutely say around education for a woman to understand potentially what menopause is all about, what symptoms are, the impact it has on the workplace, and some practical suggestions about how they can support themselves.
Thank you. It just leaves me to say thank you to our panel. Oh, sorry, were you going to... Sorry.
It was only a very, very quick
That's
one.
fine.
It was... we've used the number 77% of our industry is female, but actually in senior leadership positions, it's only 22%. So if you've got a lot of men who are the line managers, a lot of the senior management, they're not going to have the same understanding. And you mentioned education, and I think one of the key things is, and when I was leading people and people would say, I can't come in today because I'm having heavy flow in my period, I would just be, I have no clue how to deal with that level of information. What do I do? Whereas I think if we're educating everybody, it doesn't become something that's like, what do I do now? It's like, oh, we have something ready for that. We know how to deal with that, and that becomes part of, like any other health and safety, or sorry, not health and safety.
Health and well-being.
Health and well-being, yeah.
Policy. Brilliant, thank you. Well, thank you to our panel. Thank you for coming, and over to Tim.
There was one more question, which I
okay.
didn't have time to put up, but it was also about preparing for elderly parents as well, which is something that affects us who are over 50s, isn't it? So that, along with the menopause and these other great topics we've been discussing, is certainly something that we need to address as an industry. So thank you.
Oh.
That was really great.
Pleasure.
Guys, thank you for all attending this session. We have another one in 10 minutes. If in the meantime you'd like to pop next door and meet us at InEvent, please do that. But thank you all for attending, and thank you guys. That was amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you.